click subscribe and hit that bell notification. So David has gone through some very difficult times. He lost his second-born son, Absalom, because Absalom rebelled, tried to usurp his father, take the throne, and he has created a civil war in Israel. And what we found was that David was so sad and sorrowful over his son's death that he abdicated his position as the king. He just walked away. Joab in chapter 19, 1 through 9, 1 through 8, he confronts King David. He says, if you don't step up, if you don't step in, if you don't go down and speak to your men and encourage them, they will abandon you. And everything that you've suffered in your entire life will come upon you in such an evil manner that nothing will compare to the sorrow you're gonna feel after. So David responds, and he goes down and he talks to the people, and it sort of solves the problem momentarily. What we're gonna address from that point forward is that David is not at home. David is still in Mahanaim, and nobody's bringing him home. There's a season of the throne being empty. We don't know how long this took. We don't know how many days or seasons or months. It seems to be long enough to cause problems, but short enough to not be a lingering issue. So what we find in verse 8b, now Israel had fled every man to his own home. That's all of Israel after that civil war battle. They went home. So we are going to be talking about Israelites discussing politics at home. And this is what they're saying in verse 9. And all the people were arguing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies, and he saved us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? What is this political conversation that's happening in the Israelite homes? Yeah, in a generic way, that there is no one on the throne right now. There's been a sequence of events. Why have we not moved forward to fix this? Right? So this is a slow moving sentiment throughout Israel. It's lingering in people's homes, and they're arguing about it. Neighbor to neighbor, at the shopping mall, when they go to get their chicken, when they're selling their beef, they're discussing these things. And so they're saying, David was actually a really good leader. David delivered us from all of our enemies. He overcame the Philistines, their number one enemy. He brought peace. Then he ran away. He was the number one warrior, king who conquered our enemies, and he fled from his son. And what did we do with Absalom? This is what they're saying. What did we do? We chose Absalom. We rejected David. David ran away, and we were okay with that, and we chose Absalom. Now he's dead. So what's the next conclusion? Natural thought process. We need David back. We want David back. This is not a good situation. Verse 10, now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? Now I can imagine that this is like the commoners, the people who have to actually go fight in the war, talking to the elders, going to the elders and being like, hey, why haven't you gone and gotten the king? Why is he not back in Jerusalem? Why have we not heard that David is crowned king again and being anointed again? Or maybe he doesn't need to be anointed. I don't know the semantics of it. But so there's this sentiment of like, we need action. That's the feeling and the emotion in Israel. We need to move forward. We can't just stay where we are. We need to move forward. Verse 11. And King David, feeling the same way, sent his message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house when the word of all Israel has come to the king? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone, my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not commander over my army from now on in place of Joab. And he swayed the heart of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, return, both you and all your servants. So the king came back to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring the king over the Jordan. In verse 11 through 15, David is homesick. Now, I think we can all relate to this. When there's a difficulty in your life, you struggle, you fight, you push, you strive, and you get through your difficulty. And you live your life happily ever after. Well, when you get pushed back into difficulty, you know what you miss? The happily ever after. David's been a wanderer for 20 years. David has not had a home for so long. And then he went, a decade or so with a home. So now he's left his throne and he's out at Mahanaim and he wants to go home. So what does he do to go home? What is his first step to going home? So he goes to the priests, right? This is a very kind of political move. He goes to people who are neutral, who can discuss with everybody and bring people together. So he goes to the priests, and what does he say? What message does he send, and who does he send it to? Why haven't you welcomed the king home? Who's he talking to? His family, the tribe of Judah, right? So he goes to not all of Israel, he goes to one tribe, his familial tribe, and he discusses what should be done. Now, how does he state the question to them? He says it in a very particular way. Why would you be last? Why would you be the last one to welcome me home? Okay? This is like you having a brother or sister, or mother or father, and you've been gone on a long journey, and your friends throw you a party, and your parents don't go. You'd be like, what? Why would you guys be the last ones to welcome me home? So David goes to his family and he says, in a negative sense, why would you be last? And really, what is he saying? You should be first. And he swayed their hearts. He's like, we're family, we're blood. You're my flesh, you're my bone. And so he gets Judah in his pocket. Boom. Now that's only 1/11 of the tribes, okay? Then he goes and he talks to Amasa. Now, who is Amasa? Military leader in Judah, but who is running the campaign of Absalom's military? Who was Absalom's commander in the rebellion against David? Amasa. So David says, hey, everybody, you should welcome me home, only to this select group. And then he turns to the rebels, the rebel commander. And what does he say to him? I will make you the vice president. I will get rid of Joab, and you will rule my army instead of Joab. You will be the commander over the army of Israel instead of Joab. Now that's a pretty big shift. How long has Joab been with David? Decades. How many times has Joab upset David? Quite a few times. What was the last thing Joab did that upset David? He killed his son. What did David ask for Joab? He says, Joab, when you face my son, please be gentle. Be gentle with my son. And instead, Joab killed him. So the inference here is that Joab got demoted. Joab got put out. David's not having it anymore. He's like, you know what, Joab, you won't follow my commands. You won't do what I ask you to do. And you killed my son. David's a little bitter. And then he looks at the rebellious commander and he makes him the commander of the army. Why would he do that? Teach Joab a lesson and gain solidarity. Gain solidarity. He wants to bring Israel back together. So David is playing politics. He's playing politics hard. He's making decisions and he's moving forward and he's making moves and it's working, okay? So Amasa's going to come in, Judah's going to come in, and what we find in verse 15, so the king came back to the Jordan and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring the king over the Jordan. It worked. He's moving on. He's moving forward. This is good news. Verse 16, and Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite from Baharim, hurried to come down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And with him were 1,000 men from Benjamin, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and his 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan before the king. Now, who are these men? Who is Shimei and Ziba? Ziba is the servant of Saul who takes care of Saul's land, particularly Mephibosheth. Okay? The last time David saw this man, David was running for his life. He was fleeing the city, and Ziba came and gave him supplies. And David asked him a question. He said, "Where is Mephibosheth?" And what did Ziba do? He lied. He lied. He said Mephibosheth was against the king. He was glad the king was in sour straits, and he was glad that maybe he was going to get the throne back because he was the rightful heir. And so he talked trash and slandered Mephibosheth. And so David very hastily removed Mephibosheth's blessings. He's like, Ziba, you get all of Mephibosheth's land. You get all of Saul's stuff. And by now, most likely, David has heard the truth. David knows that Ziba actually lied to him. Ziba created a slanderous report of Mephibosheth, and it's all going to come out here in a second. Now, who is Shimei? When David was leaving Jerusalem, exactly like Ziba coming up to him, Shimei was on the other side of the road cursing David, saying that he's guilty of blood. The curse is upon him, and God is bringing out vengeance against David and his house, and that he's glad. He was throwing up dirt in the air, and he was throwing rocks, and he was cursing David. And then Abishai came over, and what did he want to do? He wanted to cut his head off. He's like, David, that dude's blaspheming you. That dude is talking trash. We should go end him. So now David's coming home, and this dude shows up again. What do you think his attitude's like this time? He's going to beg for forgiveness. But does he show up alone? Who does he show up with? How many people show up with Shimei? 1,000 men of Benjamin. Now, Benjamin does not like David because Saul was a Benjaminite. And so they feel like the throne was supposed to be in Benjamin, that their tribe should be the king. And Shimei is cursing him. And now Shimei is going to come, he's going to beg for mercy, but he's bringing 1,000 dudes. Now, Benjamin is known for their fighting skills. Benjamin, in the past, withheld and didn't conquer, but when they were attacked by all the other tribes, Benjamin fought back and destroyed them. They won the battle, one tribe against 11. Benjamin's pretty fierce. So he's going to come and beg for mercy, but he's also bringing a pretty big stick. He's got a lot of sway with him. And Ziba's showing up with his 15 plus people, like 35 people with his servants. So verse 18, they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household to do his pleasure. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. And he said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty. Or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" But David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel?" And the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king gave him his oath. So Shimei shows up, and he is, there's a word here, it starts with R. He is what? Repentant. What does it mean to be repentant? What is the thing you have to say to be repentant? You have to admit your guilt and ask for forgiveness. That's repentance. Shimei is a very good example of this. Was he wrong to curse David and do all that stuff? Yes. Does he know it? Yes. Does he admit it? Yes. Is he asking for forgiveness? Yes. What does David do? He forgives him. It's exactly like Jesus with us. Before we can come to the Lord, we have to admit that we are sinners, admit that we were wrong, and go to the one that we have wronged. If I sinned against my brother Raphael, I sinned not only against him, but primarily against God who created him in his image. The sins that I commit against those around me are the sins against the Creator who created them. And so we have to admit our fault, return back to God, and ask for forgiveness. And that fancy word that we call that? Repentance. Repent, turn back to God, admit your fault, and be forgiven for your sins. And Shimei does a great job of doing that, but there is an adversary. What's another word for adversary? That's an advocate. An adversary fights against you. They're charging you with guilt. And so David is the judge. David has been sinned against. And now here comes Zerai. And he is the adversary. He is Satan. And so this is very similar to Jesus talking to Peter. And Peter's like, you'll never go to the cross. You won't die. I'll fight for you. And what does he say? Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, my adversary. Right? So Abishai is not acting in the best interest of King David. Abishai is actually making David's life more difficult. Why? If he says, kill Abishai, what do you think the consequences are for David? He might have 1,000 soldiers to fight against. So he's being strong-armed. Now, to be fair, I don't think David would have done it. I think David in his forgiveness, in his grace and in his mercy, because he's been forgiven much, is going to forgive much. I think he would have overlooked it. But his second, he's the third man in line. Abishai is the commander under Joab. And he's the one in front of everybody saying, that dude should die. So what does David do in response? He publicly rebukes him. And he says, you are an adversary in front of all the men, in front of everybody, the whole entourage. You're the problem, Abishai. You and your family. How long am I going to have to put up with you guys? David is wearing thin with Joab and Abishai and these dudes. He has been putting up with them for a long time. And he's at his wit's end with these dudes. And so he calls him out publicly because publicly he challenged David. Publicly he tried to make David's life worse. So David rebukes him. Does there need to be more bloodshed, he says? No, I'm the king today. We need restoration. We need reconciliation. We need unity. We don't need more bloodshed and death. Verse 24. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. And when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? And he answered, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it, and go with the king, for your servant is lame. Verse 27, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do nothing, or do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I than to cry to the king? And the king said to him, why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided, you and Ziba shall divide the land. And Mephibosheth said to the king, oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come home safely. So this is the affair with Ziba and Mephibosheth. Now, David doesn't want to manage this situation. He doesn't want to deal with this anymore. So what he tells Mephibosheth is he says, you know what? Your affairs are dealt with. I've decided. Mephibosheth pleads his case. He says, I don't really care. I just am glad that you're home. I've been fasting and weeping for you and praying for you. And David sees the sincerity and he remembers Mephibosheth and he says, you can split the land 50-50. Now, before Ziba lied, what percentage did Mephibosheth own? 100%. Then Ziba lied, and how much percent got transferred to Ziba? 100%. David got himself in a bind, making a decision too quickly, under stress, in difficulty. It was probably nighttime, and I'm going to go out on the ledge and just say he probably didn't eat anything. He's probably hangry, and he's like, I'm making a decision. So now he's coming home. He's homesick. And he's like, you know what? I'm tired of this. It's going 50-50. It's not the most wise decision. It's not the most just decision. It's not the best decision, but it is a decision nonetheless. And Mephibosheth doesn't care. Mephibosheth is a great representation of a person who is truly concerned about love. He says, I was doomed to death and you rescued me. I don't care. I don't care. Whatever seems best to you. Now, this is very much the heart of the Christian towards Christ. It is, I've died. You've given me all of my life. I exist in you. All that I am is in you. All that I am is yours. If you were to take away my spouse, if you were to take away my job, if you were to take away my life, let your will be done. It is of no concern to me because I want you. I want to worship you. I want to serve you. I want to be near you. And if you, my King, my Lord, has so deemed to remove these blessings from me, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. It is a heart of contentment. No matter what season, no matter what reason, he is filled with love for David because of all the good grace and mercy that David has poured out on him. Now, something to keep in mind, sometimes bad guys win. Ziba is a bad dude, and he got away with it. There's no real consequence. He still won in the end. He went from 0% share to 50% share. What he did was sinful, wrong, deceitful, and just bad. But David doesn't care. David is in a very weird state right now. He has gone down this rabbit hole of the natural man, and he is climbing out of the rabbit hole a natural man. He is not being the spirit-led man that he used to be. And we'll talk about that in a second. Verse 31. Now Barzillai, the Gileadite, had come down from Rogelim, and he went on with the king to the Jordan to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem." But Barzillai said to the king, "How many years have I still to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with you. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and my mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you." And the king answered, "Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you. And all that you desire of me, I will do for you." Then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king went over. And the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. The king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. And all the people of Judah, and also half the people of Israel, brought the king on his way. So verse 31 through 39 is all about repaying kindness. Barzillai was introduced to us earlier. He brought beds and food and donkeys and water and wine, and he provided for the king. And it says here that not only when David fled out of Jerusalem, but while he lived in Mahanaim, when he lived in this city as an outcast, as an exile, this rich man provided for David abundantly. The idea is that David lacked nothing because of this man. The generosity of this man was over and above. So when David is finally coming home, this man comes out and he meets him, and there's a conversation between them. And David says, "Whatever you want, it's yours. Come live with me, and I'll provide for everything. I will repay your kindness with an overwhelming gratitude of blessing." And what does he say? What does Barzillai say? "I'm too old." I really like his description of what it means to be old. He says, "I'm 80 years old. I can't taste. My food doesn't taste at all. My drink doesn't taste at all. I can't hear. People are singing. You know, it's a young man's world. I'm just gonna die, and I'm happy. I'm content with that. I wanna be at my home with my family. I wanna die where my parents are buried and be buried in my city. But you can take my son, Chimham." David's like, "You got it. Chimham will enter my court. He will be in the royal palace from now on. He will be part of my entourage." And so the blessing that Barzillai poured out on David became a blessing for other generations, not for himself, because he knew in his old age there was nothing really for him to gain, and there was nothing for him to lose. He had everything. He was okay. He was content to die, go home and be with the Lord. Now, there is a quote out of this book. I want to read it for you because he nails it. This is Alfred Edersheim in his book, Bible History, the Old Testament. page 564, talking about the character of Barzillai. What he says is, at 80 years old, he would have remembered David as a young boy. He would have remembered Saul in his rulership. He would have remembered Samuel as the judge. He lived through that whole transition of Israel. And what would have touched this man's heart about David and about Saul, and what David represented spiritually, and why this man would have provided for David and forgiven David his trespasses. Why he would have still supported David even though David made some really bad mistakes as a ruler. He says, may we not legitimately infer that his conduct was influenced not merely by loyalty to his earthly sovereign, but by the recognition of the higher spiritual truths and the hope for Israel and the world, symbolized by the reign of David. For nearly 80 years, Barzillai had watched in distant Rogalim, I don't know that word, the varying fortunes of his loved people. He remembered the time when Samuel was judge. He recalled the hopes enkindled in the hearts of Israel when, after the brilliant exploit in his own Jabesh Gilead, Saul was proclaimed king. He had followed the waning glory of that same Saul, for far and wide are tidings carried in the east, told by watchfires and borne from home to home, until hope had almost died out in his soul. Then came the story of David, and increasingly as he followed his career, and when someone would repeat one of those new psalms, so different from the old war songs in which Jewish deeds of valor had been recorded, ascribing all to Jehovah and making man of no account, it all seemed to mark a new period in the history of Israel, and Barzillai felt that David was indeed God's anointed, the symbol of Israel's real mission and the type of its accomplishment. End quote. The value of living that long is knowing and seeing what God is doing in the earth, recognizing the blessing of God's anointed, God's selected rulers, God's plan and purpose being played out. And Barzillai blessed God's people in the hope of God's mission. That's what he was talking about. Verse 40, the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah, and also half the people of Israel brought the king on his way. So who all brought David back? All of Judah and half of Israel. Why half? Because they weren't invited. There was division in the land, and David only went to Judah. That's a problem. Some of the people came out. They heard about it. They came out to bring David in. But in verse 41, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to him, why have our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan and all of David's men with him? And the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is our close relative. Why then are you angry over this matter? What are they arguing about? So Israel is saying, why did you not bring us in? If the king is coming home, why is only Judah invited? He is not only the king of Judah, he is the king of Israel. And you leave us out? Why are you trying to steal the king's favor? Why are you trying to manipulate him into your pocket? And so Judah responds, and they say, look, we're family. And they say, have we eaten at the king's expense? Or has he given us any gifts? Right? Is he cutting us tax breaks? Is he really doing us favors? We're just family. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king and in David. We have more than you. Why then did you hate us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? They're like, we've been talking about this for a while. We've wanted to bring the king back. And you have shown disrespect, disregard, and disdain for us. Now, who caused this? Why is there a fight between Judah and the other 11 tribes? Because David. David played a political move, and now it's backfiring. And there's an argument. Now here's the problem. It says at the end of 43, but the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. What does that mean? They won the argument. They argued better. It doesn't mean they're right. You can win an argument. It doesn't mean you're right. Okay? So Judah won. Now, if there's anything we've learned about Israel, they are a fickle people. They are stubborn. They don't like to be disregarded. They don't like to be disrespected. And so they take offense. You have now another division in Israel. It started with Absalom, but it's not over. David is being restored to the crown, but he needs continuous renewal. There needs to be a continuous growth of unity back into Israel. And David playing sly political tricks is not helping. It's causing more problems. And so in chapter 20, verse 1, there happened to be there a worthless man whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite. And he blew the trumpet and said, we have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. So all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem. So what just happened? More separation. Why? A worthless fellow, a divisive, argumentative, proud, arrogant, selfish person standing up and inciting division, inciting civil war. He's like, you know what, guys? We don't need to stand for this anymore. So he blows his horn. Here's a question. When you leave the house in the morning, do you take your horn with you? It's in the car. What's this dude walking around with a horn for? He fancies himself a leader. He's actually pretty important where he comes from. He's a pretty big feller with big britches. So he says, you know what, guys? We're not going to stand for this. And everybody's like, yeah, because I'm upset. He takes advantage of these people's emotions, their state of frustration. They feel like they've been cast out. They've been disadvantaged. And so now here comes a worthless person taking advantage of these people, using political schemes to maneuver his own power. There's nothing new under the sun. In my personal opinion, that's politics today. Nothing different there. So everybody leaves. David had half of Israel on his side. How much of Israel does he have on his side now? None. Who caused it? Some worthless dude. Because somebody won an argument. That's interesting. You proved them wrong. You showed them how stupid they were, and you lost them. For the sake of your argument, you lost their heart. David had the heart of Judah, but he didn't have the heart of Israel. And he allowed this moment to get away and cause greater problem than solutions. He needed to win their heart, and he lost them because there was an adversary who was not helping, but causing more problems. A Sheba. Verse 3. And David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines who he left to the care for the house, and he put them in a house under guard and provided for them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood. What does it mean to be a widow? You lose your husband. These women lived in widowhood. Was their husband dead? No. David's their husband. So David takes them, puts them in a house. He provides their food, their clothing, all the resources that they could ever need. But he puts a guard on the house. That's interesting. He's like, nope, it's a practical prison. And they live like widows. And it specifically says that David never had relations with them again. David never had relations with them again. Why? What happened to these women? Because David's son, Absalom, had taken them and slept with them. Absalom had defiled them. So because there was an inappropriate relationship between his son and these concubines, David said, you know what? I'm dead to you guys. It is not right that we should be together anymore. Now, morally, there's not much we can say about this. Like, this isn't a good thing. This isn't like God said. This is a cultural thing This is something that we can't relate to in our culture, primarily because I need to look up the statistics, but the average person has like multiple partners in their life in our culture. But in this culture, you have very few partners in life. And intimate relations is restricted to marriage. It is not good and normal to sleep with a prostitute, to sleep around. So for women particularly, if you have multiple spouses, it's because you've been a widow multiple times, or you're kind of a morally reprehensible person. Like you're the gutter folk. You're the bad white trash kind of people. You sleep around a lot. But it's culturally inappropriate. So marriage was really the only source of that relationship. And David says that relationship is over. We are no longer married. I'm dead. But you are not free to sleep around. You're not free to get remarried. It's a really strange situation, but that's what David did. What can you guys take away from this? What can we learn that says that this is important for my life? I should learn these things. This is a good application of this chapter to my life. Being more obedient to Jesus, conviction. So that word is a really good word. Conviction means the inner strength that compels you to stand up for what you believe in, to do what you believe God is calling you to do. That's conviction. I believe that Jesus is resurrected from the dead, and therefore I live a life worthy of that. And the life that I live is not my own, but it is Christ in me. Conviction. Repaying kindness. When you've been blessed abundantly by somebody, bless them back. Bless them in return. You have been blessed to be a blessing. Now imagine that we all did that. If you, not expecting other people to be a blessing, but were a blessing to other people, and then they repaid that back to you, and how that would compound, right? The amount of blessing that would be flowing from person to person. Even if it's just David took him over there and then he prayed for him and he blessed him. He says, the Lord keep you and guide you and protect you and bless your family and give you many children and long years. And just praying for him. That was how David repaid him. Not only, he brought his son, but that was in the end. It says that he blessed him and he sent him home. So David is in a weird state right now. He is not in a praying state. We remember David when his wives were taken, when Saul was chasing him, and he would ask, and he would go to Abiathar and be like, inquiring of the Lord, should we go out to battle? How should we go out to battle? What should we do? God, what is the direction? Because I don't know my way forward. But David has learned his own strength, and he has gotten away from the strength of the Lord. And he is walking as a natural man. He's living as a natural man. And that means that there's natural consequences. If he lived as a spiritual man, always seeking God's will, there would be spiritual consequences. Instead, he's making moves, he's making decisions, he's pulling pieces, he's putting people here. Why would you take your betrayer's captain? Why would you take that rebellious Amasa and make him your commander of your army? That doesn't sound very smart. Why would you do an injustice and give Ziba 50% of the land? Why would you go to just Judah? Those are all logical decisions for a natural person. That doesn't mean that is God's best course of action. That's not the wisdom from above. David has lost his way in prayer, seeking God's will before making decisions, saying, what should I do? Here I am. This is the situation. God, give me wisdom. Help me, guide me, direct me. What do I do? We don't see any of that. What's interesting is all of his songs, like the Psalms that he wrote, a lot of them are, God, direct me, help me, guide me. I need you. We need your help. I'm lost. They're coming to get me. I need defense. Most of those are written in his days of trial. But now he's just living like every other person would live, not like the man after God's own heart. And we see that with Bathsheba. That was that big shift. David hasn't come back from that. God has forgiven him. God is restoring him back to the crown and to the throne, but David is not being renewed spiritually. You can do all of the outward things required of you to be king. to be a follower of Jesus. But there must be that spiritual renewal that is that heavenly kiss that directs and guides our lives. And it's an easy thing to become a natural man, especially as you grow up and you grow older and you grow with wisdom and knowledge and you understand the tools in front of you. David was a young man and he didn't have a lot of know-how. He didn't have the political background. He didn't have the experience. God taught him directly. But now that he has these tools in his belt, now he has strength and he has purpose and he has directions and choices. But he doesn't have that spiritual vigor that relies on God. And these are the consequences. Forgiveness. David's forgiveness is important. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 14 through 15, Jesus says, "Forgive as you have been forgiven, because if you don't, you won't be forgiven." If you are not a forgiving person, you will not be forgiven by a forgiving God. It is a requirement. It is a commandment. And David gets that right, but he gets that right because he's been forgiven much. It's easy to find fault in people, to not forgive them when you feel like you've only been forgiven for small faults. But if you are a murderer and God has forgiven you of murder, you can forgive murder. But if you're a liar and God has only forgiven you for lying and nothing else, you can forgive lying, but not cheating. You can forgive lying, but not stealing. You can forgive lying, but not being disrespectful or taking advantage. The measure that you believe and understand that you've been forgiven is the measure that you'll forgive other people. So I think it's important. The key to forgiveness is recognizing that we all deserve death, that we were all enemies at war with God. He has forgiven us murder because we murdered in our heart. He has forgiven us adultery because we are adulterers in our hearts. We are fornicators. We are proud. We are arrogant. We are rebellious. We are selfish. We take advantage of people. We hurt our loved ones. We speak to them and we curse them. We curse people created in God's image, and He forgave us. We can forgive all of those sins. We can forgive all the small sins and we can forgive all the big sins. We can forgive the child molester. We can forgive the pedophile. We can forgive the murderer. We can forgive the adulterer. We can forgive the proud and the arrogant. We can forgive because we have been, and we have been forgiven by God. We must forgive as we have been forgiven, because if we don't, we show the evidence that we have not been forgiven. David is a flawed ruler. David is flawed. We start out with David thinking so highly of him, and we have walked with him long enough to find out that he is not Jesus. He is not God. This is something that we all go through when we look up to our parents and we think that they are the best, they are the greatest, they're the smartest, they're the fastest, they're the most wise people in the world. And then you find out one day that they are just like you, flawed, broken, needing of forgiveness. David is a bad ruler and he is a good ruler. Every leader has their goods and their bads. Some of them downright evil, don't get me wrong. But God uses flawed rulers. He does it over and over again because every single person that has ever been born, except for Jesus, is flawed. And so we have to remember them, and we have to pray for them, and we have to bring them before our God and say, God, help them, give them wisdom, give them knowledge, give them grace, give them mercy, and save them. Above all things, save them. Because without Jesus, our rulers will go astray, and they will do the work of the devil. But with Jesus, they can do the work of God. Well, let me rephrase that. They always do the work of God because God allows them into their position. He is sovereign over all. Nothing is a mistake. He allows these things on. Divisive people. Sheba. This dude. There's always that dude. Sheba is the man who spoke up and was like, what portion do we have in David? Everybody, we need to go. Let's get out of here. He blew his horn. Like, come on, man, get your horn out of here. Get out of here. He caused such a commotion. He took and he divided Israel, and he causes chaos in the body. This is in Romans chapter 16, verse 17. Let's read that. That's a good one to read. Romans 16, 17. This is two Christians. This is the Apostle Paul writing at the very, very end of a very long letter with lots of really good stuff. And he says this, I beg you, brothers, to watch. I beg you to pay attention, to look out, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them, for such persons do not serve our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own appetites. And by smooth words and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. People are coming into the church and they might cause division. And Paul begs, he says, guys, please stay alert, pay attention. These people will come in and with very smiling faces and very good handshakes and great personalities, they will deceive. They will flatter and they will lead people astray. Naive people who are not prepared. They are children who are not mature Christians, and they will cause problem. It is such a sad, sad day when the body of Christ fights against itself, and this happens over and over and over again. Churches split, churches divide, pastors are fired. It just, the amount of chaos and ruin from one person coming into the church and causing problems. One person coming into the Bible study. And you know where it starts? It starts right here. Division doesn't start in the pulpit. Division starts in small groups. It starts at the dinner table. It starts at lunch. It starts with gossip. It starts with slander. It starts with, well, it could just be a little different. Wouldn't you like to see this over here? Oh, but this could be so much better right here. It is a lying tongue, and they are coming in to cause chaos in the body. And so we must be alert and vigilant. Come back next week for 2 Samuel chapter 20 continued all the way into 21. We are going to be talking about embers and fires, the rebellion of Sheba. Embers and fire. How do you handle embers and what do you do with fire? Quench it. You stomp it out. Cannot allow it to fester.